Hello and welcome back. I'm Nicole, a cottage witch, and today I'm doing a Just Books video, just for a change of pace. And I've read a lot of books about both the occupied Palestinian territories and about Israel over the years, and so I thought I'd share a few of those with you today. One of the first books I read was by historian Martin Gilbert. Let's see if I can get this all in the shot. Probably not. Well, close. Which is a history of Israel. It's important to note that this is just a history of Israel. It is in no way a history of the Palestinian people, or even Christian Arabs who live in either Israel or Palestine today. This is just a history of Israel, and it is thorough in that regard, but it still has its limitations. So this was one of the early books I read. Now, one of the other books that I highly recommend that I don't have, so I'll put up a screenshot, because I listened to the audiobook. I'm listening to the audiobook now, and I've read it, but I borrowed it from the library a few years ago. And that is The 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. And it is a phenomenal book. And it's everything about the history that doesn't make it into sort of the popular idea of history. And certainly doesn't make it into Israeli history textbooks, unfortunately. So that's a fantastic, fantastic book that I'm rereading now. And it really doesn't get, I think, the sort of notice that it deserves, because for all that Palestine is in the news, I think very relatively little is known by non-Palestinians about its history. And so that's a really important book. And it's not super long. It's not nearly as long as Martin Gilbert's book. And it's very readable, but it's very meticulous as well. And a slight tangent here, because the war could end up going on a slight tangent into Lebanon again, because that's happened before. Another book that I highly recommend is Pity the Nation, The Abduction of Lebanon by Robert Fisk. I've read a couple other books of his. They all seem to be this big. They're huge. Also really thorough. He's a journalist who's lived and worked in the Middle East for, actually, I don't know how many decades at this point, but many, and is very knowledgeable. This covers, what period does this cover? Just war? Yeah, from the 70s. So it covers the rise and fall of the Lebanese state, the foundation of Israel, and the Palestinian diaspora before that a little bit, but its focus is mostly the 80s. And it is so good. And if you're worried about the direction this war might go in, this is full of good information, not encouraging information, but useful information. So that's a book about the recent history of Lebanon. And another good book, if you prefer your history in graphic novel form, is Palestine by Joe Sacco. I have another book of his, I think, but I can't remember what it is. Anyway, graphic novel history of, I think, the creation of Israel. It's been a few years since I've read this one. So he spent 2 months in the occupied territories almost 10 years ago in the winter of 91 to 92. Okay. So this book is about the first intifada against the Israeli occupation, which was beginning as he was writing, so this early 2000s, I believe. Contents 93 or 92. This version published in 2012. Yeah, so again, recent-ish history-ish. I say ish because it's 30 years ago and it's only gotten worse, I would say. But yeah, this is a good one. It's I mean, none of the books you're going to read about Palestine, unless it's a cookbook, is going to be cheerful, I think, because war is such a huge part of their existence. It has been for so many decades. So anyway, this is a good one. Now, let's see what else I've got here. Okay, a couple other books before I get into books actually written by Palestinians or other Palestinian authors. A couple books I read years and years ago, and this one was written in the 80s, I believe, which is depressing. It's called Arab and Jew, Wounded Spirits in a Promised Land by David K. Shipler. And has many flags. There's a section, I think this is the section at the back, that dives into the various stereotypes they have of each other. The idea being that you can't have effective communication with somebody if your ideas about them are all based on stereotypes. And so there are a lot of fears that they have of each other, Jewish Israelis and Palestinians, because there are Arab Israelis as well who factor into things. And of course Christians in both countries. So it gets complicated. So this is in 3 sections. Whoops. Aversion, images, and interaction. And I remember finding it an absolutely fascinating book and wondered why more people hadn't read it. It's not an encouraging book. Because it was written in the 80s, it's even more depressing to read now because so little has changed. But it does have a lot of useful information when it comes to understanding people's mindsets and their fears. And because often when people are afraid, they're not making rational decisions. And they're not thinking reasonably about the people they're afraid of. So this is an important book for exploring stereotypes all around, I found. Highly recommend that one. Another book that is a bit dated, but kind of not, is Palestine, Peace Not Apartheid by Jimmy Carter. This is also not a new book. When was this one written? A fair while back, because I read it a long time ago. 2006, and I probably read it very shortly after that. He really does know a lot about the area. He's very knowledgeable about it. And so this goes through his experiences, some of the history that he was involved in, some of the history that other presidents were involved in, some of the agreements, and some of the current issues, and current as of 2006. Oops, slightly out of frame there. And this I found useful because any situation that we find ourselves in now didn't come out of a vacuum, and Israel and Palestine is no different. The war that's bordering on ethnic cleansing at the moment, it didn't come out of nowhere. The anger of Palestinians didn't come out of nowhere, and Hamas wouldn't exist if it weren't for this occupation. So there's a lot of history to get into, and it's difficult history. It's a very emotional history, and people do get very emotional about it because there's a lot of fear and a lot of pain associated with it. And so sometimes being able to look at these histories through an outsider's worldview is helpful, because he, for example, didn't have as emotional a connection to this land as some people do. So that was Palestine, Peace Not Apartheid. Another book that I read ages ago by an Israeli journalist, Amira, is called Drinking the Sea at Gaza, Days and Nights in a Land Under Siege. And she has been, of all the reporters I've ever read, she's the Israeli reporter who's one of the biggest proponents of treating Palestinians like human beings, which is sort of depressing to think about, because you'd like to think that they're being humans could be taken for granted, but it really can't. There's a lot of ways in which the Israeli government and military has severely mistreated Palestinian civilians over so many years now. And it's caused a lot of pain and suffering. And so this woman she's actually an Israeli, Jewish Israeli reporter who's written a lot for Haaretz. I'm sure I'm not saying that properly. It's this newspaper. It's an Israeli newspaper that's more sort of left of center, I suppose you could say. And the people she interviews and the perspectives she tells are just really heartbreaking. It's really difficult because she knows a lot of these people, and a lot of these people are her friends. They've become her friends over the years, and what has happened to them is very painful. And as an Israeli, obviously, she doesn't want to live in fear, but she also doesn't want her friends who are Palestinian to live in fear. And this is one of the relatively few books I've seen where an Israeli has crossed the border and spent considerable amounts of time with Palestinians. Now, I know a lot of Israelis do. I mean, I say a lot. I don't know how many, but I know they do. In various lines of work, journalism, humanitarianism, probably various other sorts of things. But this is one of the few books I've read where somebody has spent so much time getting to know the alleged enemy and has presented them in such a human way. And so I highly recommend this book. It is excellent. I'll just quickly show the table of contents here. So this was, some of these books are quite old because I started reading them a long time ago. 96. So yeah, it's not new. And yet the same problems still exist. And some people have now spent their entire lives up until this point living under these circumstances. So yeah, her work, and even if you didn't read that book, reading her columns, I would highly recommend as well. Okay, so getting into more Palestinian voices. This writer is not Palestinian. He's from Calgary. Marcello Cintio wrote an excellent book called Pay No Heed to the Rockets, Palestinian in the Present Tense. And he interviews quite a lot of Palestinian authors. I don't know that he interviewed these two. Mahmoud Darwish is one of my favorites. He's amazing. However, this is a more recent book. Yeah, 2018. One of the more recent books I have on it. And there's the contents, and he talks a lot to just a whole variety of people that he met and interviewed in the West Bank and Gaza. And this, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, this is the book where I read that he'd interviewed either a psychologist or a psychiatrist who talked about having a hard time treating Palestinians because everybody has PTSD. Like, everybody. So how do you even know what's normal and healthy, and how can you get there if it's ongoing? So yeah, this is a beautiful book. He does talk a lot about authors like Darwish, who is an iconic Palestinian poet. And I'll get to him in a second. But there are also a lot of stories about lesser known authors and just ordinary people that he found. Barghouti is also a very well known. I think he left to live in Egypt. I'm not sure if he's still alive. Should check that. The tabbed people are particular authors I want to look into. But finding books by Palestinians in Canada is actually quite difficult. It's a bit frustrating. So anyway, if you're interested in discovering more about Palestinian authors and just kind of want an overview, this is a fantastic book because it gives you a little bit of information about all sorts of people, and then you can decide which authors are of the most interest to you. it's a beautiful book, and I may just read it again sometime. And then, oh, here's the reading list at the back here. Maybe I'll just show that on the screen for a second, if anyone's interested. Mohammed Al-Kurd was an author that he brought in on a Zoom call, who was getting his, I think, Masters of Creative Writing somewhere in the southern US at the time, and his poems are making their rounds on Instagram at the moment. All right. Okay, so I have a couple more books here, and then one that I'll show on the screen. This one is 3 Wishes Palestinian and Israeli Children Speak by Deborah Ellis. This is more of a kid's book, because it is hard to explain war and violence and oppression and all these things to kids. So this is a book specifically for kids. See if I can find if there's a contents anywhere here. And these are all the kids. That is entirely too many children. All right. And so basically it's a kid, a little bit about them, and what they have to say. From just a variety of kids and their experiences in Israel and Palestine. And it's a good way to humanize the situation for kids, because there's just such a lot of violence and dehumanization happening at the moment. So yeah, it's when was this written? 2004, so that's on the older side too. I really need to get some newer books about the situation. This is one of the last books I've got here. I've just ordered another one. Well, this is the last one I'll show, because the other one I've ordered is by Mohammed Al-Kurd. It's a poetry collection of his that I wanted to read, and I found it on Amazon. And I had some of these other authors, Palestinian authors, I haven't been able to find. That being said, Sacco Books, which I'll link below if I remember, is a good source for all sorts of Middle Eastern authors in the West, because it's hard to get those books from other publishers, or you have to import them from like Alexandria or something, and it's expensive. So Sacco Books is generally the first place I check to find some of these books. Although I think most of the ones I've shown are pretty easily accessible, either on Amazon or just nearby Canadian bookstores. This is Victims of a Map, bilingual anthology of Arabic poetry by Adonis Mahmoud Darwish and Sami Al-Qasim. It's a wonderful collection. If you have any interest in poetry, it's beautiful. Darwish is my favorite. But the other two are excellent as well. And it's got the Arabic on one side, which is lovely because I'm learning Arabic, although this is so far above my comprehension level, it's not even funny. And then the English. And yeah, it's a very slim little collection, but very beautiful and very moving. And I think that's it. I think that's my list of books on Israel and Palestine. If anybody knows how to get any other good Palestinian authors. Oh, and Minor Detail, which I just read and posted about, by, I can't remember the Palestinian author's name, but I will find it. I feel like I'm missing one. Oh yeah, Salt Houses. I'll put a screenshot of that in because I think I listened to that as an audiobook as well. That's a fiction novel about the diaspora, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly. Also very good. So it's starting to be a bit easier to find books by Palestinian authors, but it's still not easy, and it's relatively easier to find Israeli authors. Amos Oz is also a favorite of mine. Love him. And also books by Americans or Brits about Israel and Palestine. Those are easier to find, which is not really what I'm looking for, since they've helped cause so many of the problems in the region. I'm more interested in Palestinian stories about Palestine at this point. Yeah, so I'm on the hunt for those, if anybody knows of any good ones. And yeah, that's that. I'll end with this by Sami Al-Qasim. Very short little poem. Leaves fall from time to time, but the trunk of the oak tree.